We're so privileged to have Jay McLauchlan here. Can I reveal your age?
Sure.
What is it?
91.
Jay is 91. So let me just tell you a little bit about Jay. He was born in Cleveland in 1932. He grew up in Massachusetts in a place called Padanaram, and he came to Gloucester in 1963. His life's work has been fine woodworking, sculpture, construction of 2 houses, and ocean sailing and racing. He's a founding board member of Maritime Gloucester. He lives in East Gloucester with his wife, painter and writer Sarah Stotzer. He was a good friend of my father, Jonathan Bayliss. He was at those carousing parties with Vincent Ferrini, Charles Olson, the young Peter Anastas. So this is a precious opportunity to look back at those days. So thank you, Jay.
So I was lucky enough to spend some time with Jay this summer. We got together and we just talked about the 5 writers, and Jay told me stories, and I made a list of questions. We have 40 minutes. We'll see how far we get in talking about 5 different people, and Jay's pretty much going to tell us what he wants.
Thank you, Peter. I left New Hampshire, where I'd been working as a designer craftsman in wood, in spring of 1963, and I wanted to get to the water. I wanted to get to the ocean, and I took a trip, checked out Portsmouth, Newburyport, got to Gloucester, and drove around. And when I got to East Gloucester, I passed the Beacon Marine Basin, and there was a sign on the building that said, "Apartment for rent and shop space for rent." Perfect. So I went back to New Hampshire, got a truck, and loaded my tools and my stock of wood and the machines that I had, and brought them into the Beacon. And it was that building right as you enter the Beacon Marine Basin, right on the ground floor, right on the corner, and signed a lease, of course, and I set up shop. Now, to my delight, Peter Anastas was living at the Beacon Marine at the time, and he naturally was curious about who's this new guy that's moved in here. And he came in, and we got talking, and we hit it off. And I found out that he'd just come back from Italy, where he was teaching and working in Italy and writing, and that he was presently teaching at Winchester, senior high school English, and he was using Hawthorne, he was using Melville, Thoreau, and Call Me Ishmael, and so he introduced me to the very active poetic, artistic, and writing community of Gloucester. It was just the luckiest thing that could ever have happened to me that he was there, because what an intro. I mean, just a life changing. And he found out I went to Berkeley, and he said, "Oh, you got to meet Jonathan Bayliss. He was teaching at Berkeley, and he got his his master's degree in English." And so he brought Jonathan over to the workshop, and we hit it off. We talked about the scene in the 50s at San Francisco and Oakland, Reth Rocks and Patchen doing their poetry, jazz poetry, accompanied by a piano, a bass, and a horn, and that Finocchio's restaurant, Ferlinghetti. We both knew Ferlinghetti at City Lights, and we really hit it off. And it was that meeting and subsequent meetings that Peter and Jonathan said, well, let's include Jay at the meetings that Charles Olson comes to the evenings, and it was once a week for a while, at Jonathan Bayliss's house on Washington Street. And that was just fascinating. You could see the power of Charles. Now, this morning we heard that very good, I don't know if he's still here, but it was fascinating, the presentation and the understanding of the breadth of progressive verse, the whole feeling. Well, Charles was like that over a bottle of whiskey in a meeting, and very vociferous about we've got to preserve this particular house. The city is going to hell. They're tearing down beautiful buildings. We got to do something about it. And he would wave his hands emphatically, and Jonathan would sit back, and he was completely different. He was calm, and he would listen to Charles expound, and then he'd say, now, what should we do about, how can we go about doing this? And that, with Peter especially, started the Gloucester Concerned Citizens and the publication of soundings and the letters to the editor, which Charles loved to do, of course, and he was on the practical side of, you stated the problem perfectly. How do we accomplish something? How do we do something? And that was his personality and his strength. And of course, you know about his work with Gorton's, and you know about his work with the city, and those were examples of how he would take his brilliant mind, his knowledge of mathematics as well as English, and translate it into plausible and successful action. It wasn't totally successful, but it was but it was an approach.
Well, and you told me that you felt that you and Jonathan made a special connection over. You want to talk about that a little bit? Elaborate on that? And
yeah.
You have
an example. He knew that I was using geometry in my sculpture, with actually making spherical triangles in great blocks of mahogany, and also using tricks with math to make oval tables. I knew how to make an oval table of any length and width, but it was still a perfect oval. And if you use 4 centers instead of 2 centers, you can sort of enlarge it a little bit and make it even more useful for a conference table, for example. Now, I brought along an iso-recto tetrahedron. Now, this is a character in Gilgamesh, and it's a half of a cube. You see, picture this, and then this. It's a cube. Now, this is a equilateral triangle, but these are isosceles triangles, and this angle on the top is a right angle. It's 3 right angles. And I'm going to read just a tiny bit about this prop. Let me get my reading glasses out. It's only a paragraph. Okay. Gilgamesh is talking to Lil Amin. Lil Amin is a priestess. He's the king of the kingdom. And she comes into his studio, and she sees this. He's working on this. It's actually an omelette, but he's got a bigger example of it. Ah, my isorectotetrahedron. You weavers abhor such a lopsided signet, with too many planes, but without a single facet that adds up to more or less than half a circle, especially when 3 out of 4 are only 2/3 regular. Or perhaps it's the sharp straight lines. This tense jackstone is 1 corner of a cubic brick. I can hew its fundamentals with 6 strokes of my binary axe. With 4 faces of 3 sides each, it's the trivium and quadrivium of all faculties. It breeds all the numbers we'll ever need to count the stars or measure Earth by season and degree. Even music has 12 sounds, and all words are made from twice as many. Now, I'm of the opinion of, and I've never seen this backed up in any writing, that this represents the populace, the base. The point represents the jefe, the chieftain, the priest, the monarch, whoever is at the top of the pinnacle. And the 3 sides represent the legislative, judicial, and executive. And in Sumeria, the priests were the judicial, and the priests were extremely powerful, but they did have an army, and they did have, of course, they did have the administration part. So that's so much for this, but it's
And Jay, you told me that you felt that Gilgamesh sums up a vision that Jonathan Bayliss had for society and the interaction between human beings and nature through society. Could you articulate that for us? How it relates to this pyramid?
we have to have the balance. He looked for balance everywhere, and he found it. And in his writings, he found it also, the balance between the characterizations, the balance between the stories, and the balance between the emotional relationships. And I think that can be thought of in a geometric way. And one thing, if you read Prologus, how many, just show of hands, how many have read Prologus? Not too many. But you know that in that, he subdivides the chapter heading with right angles. Remember that? With the 2 square sides and the hypotenuse. And you can even read the entire book in that relationship. You can read all of the hypotenuse chapters, and then you can read the 2 different sides, the long side and the short side. So that he puts interesting math in his complicated and wonderful writing.
And I had the impression that in this meeting with these brilliant men, all of whom had inclinations in different directions, you made some special connections over the fact that you were someone who worked in form, and he was a person interested in the form of society, in structures, in mathematical things having to do with computers and so on, so that he found in a way a more concrete connection with you over a philosophical concept that has to do with form, the form of society. Would you agree with that?
Yes, I ask them once in a while why I was included. Because I hadn't written any, I never wrote anything except a couple of bad poems. But they said, because you understand, you get it, you are also part of the transfer of a goal to actuality. And I'll give you just a very quick example. One of the things that we did when we were Gloucester Concerned Citizens was to pick up Lane's Cove, just down the road, pick up Lane's Cove for peace as a protest against the Vietnam War. Instead of standing out on the corner with banners and signs and everything, we did something. We had 2 pickup trucks. We filled them twice, took them to the then existing Gloucester dump, full of trash. Lane's Cove has never been so clean. That's an example of that translation. I would like to go back just a little to the Beacon Marine days. That was extraordinary time. It was 63 to 65, and we did some crazy things. There was junk all over the place, and we took that junk and we made pop art out of it. We made about 6 different in 6 different places sculptures, and labeled them crazy, and just had a great fun with it one Sunday and put a big sign outside on East Main Street, and we got a lot of people that came in there and enjoyed it, and we had a hell of a good time doing it. But the best of all was the bathtub race. Johnny Alexander was renovating 2 bathrooms and taking these old iron tubs out of and putting in showers. And they were sitting there in the yard next to the crane. And by the way, the crane had previously been used as a granite crane in one of the quarries. And I said, "What are you going to do with those tubs?" And he said, "I'm going to scrap them." So I said, "Well, can we use them first?" And he said, "Well, what do you want to do?" And I said, "Have a bathtub race." And he said, "Well, all right." And we took the feet off them and all the faucets and everything, and plugged every hole in it so it would float. And then we used the truck crane to launch them with straps, put them over, and there was about this much freeboard on each side, just enough, because they displaced the water, and that made them float. And then we carefully got in them, and we were going to paddle from the Beacon over to the Rudder restaurant across Rocky Neck with tennis rackets. The tennis rackets, we put a little plywood over the strings of the tennis rackets, and we got in, and we had a chase boat. Eddie Alexander followed us with the chase boat, and we paddled across, and we got midway, and I think it was Bill Sibley came in to the harbor with his fishing boat and made just enough wake so that both tubs shipped water, and there we were left in and the tubs sank, and they're still in the middle of Smith Cove. That's the kind of crazy things, and I could go on, but that's a book, another story.
So when Peter took you to Jonathan Bayliss's house on Washington Street, and you had these meetings that went into the night, and I think there was a lot of drinking. But the basic thing that they were talking about at that time was the redevelopment that was occurring. Is that right? And how to protest it.
Yes, but they would talk about their writing. They would talk about their work also. But
sure.
But the thing that was happening in Gloucester was that this was before they changed the form of government from selectmen to the council. And there was an attitude of, well, the fisheries are having trouble, but they were welcoming more tourism, and they were tearing down beautiful, beautiful old buildings to make room for the new, I can't even remember the specifics here. But that was the big concern.
And the thing that sort of crystallized for me talking to you, and also by thinking about these 5 writers just for this conference, is the way that each one of them, they were so synchronized in their, philosophically, in terms of their idea of what is a good community, what is a good city, and Olson's idea of polis. And Jonathan Bayliss, as you say, he was more practical. different ones of you connected in different ways over these issues, but that was the thing, the general thing that you shared. How
Yes.
Yes, anyway.
Oh, I got to tell this one story. Peter said, Charles is going to be reading at Tufts. Let's go in and catch that. And so we drove to Tufts, and I brought a little prop with me here. Charles got up and read some wonderful, wonderful poetry. And then there was a pause, and he brings out his bottle of whiskey, Scotch whiskey. And then he reads another poem. Beautiful. And then he's another. That was Charles, and he never got tight. It didn't affect him. He could drink all night without being drunk. He was so massive.
Yeah, I hope we make it to the end, Jim. So, tell.
It was tea.
Oh, we won't tell them that. Tell us about Vincent Ferrini. Getting to know Vincent Ferrini.
Now, Vincent, this is 1963. Vincent had his frame shop at where the Writer Center is now, as you know. And what a wonderful guy. He'd go in to get a picture framed, and he would ask, he wanted to know about the artist, he wanted to know about how it was going to be hung and everything, but he wanted to know about the people that came in there to get their frames. And he would talk poetry. He would talk in the terms that he wrote, the same way that he wrote. And so it was a joy to get to know Vincent. And he later, I think, I'm not sure, but I think it was 1970 that he married Mary Shore, around that time. And Mary and Vincent lived on Ledge Road, and they had a fireplace with, it was the damnedest, lousiest fireplace I'd ever seen. It was 2 spaces with a couple of bricks in the corner, and it was open to 2 sides, and it didn't draw worth a damn. So I had done some masonry work. My house in Lanesville had 11,000 bricks in one chimney. And I repaired that, and I had built one other fireplace in New Hampshire. So I said, well, I can try to fix that. So I added a few bricks to the smoke shelf, and by golly, that changed the roll of the smoke, and it helped a great deal. But I got to know Mary, who was just this wonderful artist. And one day, Vincent said, it's right after a tail end of a northeaster, a serious storm. Let's walk down to the back shore. We walked down that long road. It wasn't too far, and we got to the thing, and the waves were crashing in, just crashing in like this. And Vincent looks at it for a while, and then he's moving in this like this, back and forth. The waves are fucking the rocks. Typical Vincent. Typical Vincent. But he was just the nicest guy, and he and Charles. I never was in the same room with Vincent and Charles. I never saw them interact. And what we know about that is what we've read and what you've heard from other people. But I do know that they had great respect for each other, but they differed a great deal also. They were collaborators in publishing. Vincent had been published, and he would lead the way sometimes with certain periodicals, and Charles got started in that, and one of the first ones was Evergreen Review. And anyway, so I can't really speak to their interactions with each other at all. That's something I miss. I wish I had.
But you had an impression about the different ways that the two men expressed themselves.
Yeah, well, they were both forceful. Charles was extremely forceful. I'm sure you've all seen YouTube. There are good examples of him reading, wonderful, and you could see not only the rhythm but the forcefulness that he presents. And Vincent was very much more political. His background led him to be a socialist and or a communist. It was for his concern was for the people, for the workers, for the working man. And Charles was more broader, and certainly his experience with FDR was a complete opposite. But it was still Democrat, but still, yeah. So we got to talk about Joe. Okay.
Joe Garland. You met Joe Garland at Beacon Marina?
Yeah. They, back in those days, most sailboats' masts were wood, and I was good at varnishing, and Eddie Alexander, Jack's brother, would haul me up the mast of the wooden mast of the boats, and I'd have a pail of sandpaper and scrapers, and I fixed a pelican hook so I could lower myself down. He could go and do work someplace else. No one had to bother me, and I could lower myself down, work until I completed the whole thing. And varnishing the same way, haul me up, and then varnish, come down a little bit, and so on. And one day, this was the year that Joe Garland was redoing the now I can't remember the name. Yeah, thank you. And he saw me, and so he got talking, and
What was that name?
The Great Republic.
Okay.
Thank you. And we got talking, and I had come from a sailing background. When I grew up in Paidnarum, I had a little beetle cat when I was about, 13, 14. And so I had and my parents lived on a 51-foot cutter instead of a house for 17 years. So I learned a lot about repairing an old wooden boat, and that's probably why I became a woodworker. And anyway, so we got to know each other, and I found out that Joe not only was the historian of Gloucester in a very, very interesting way, a unique way, and his books about Boston, about Eastern Point, about the Great Patilio, the fishing industry, that was the great heritage of the fishing industry, and how the men could go out and do one of the most dangerous jobs on the planet and love it. I mean, that's amazing when you think about it. Those guys liked to sail. They liked to sail fast, and they liked to fish, and they liked the money that they got for it. And and Joe sort of epitomized that, and it was a great honor. And in a book club, and we had Joe talk right after the Unknown Soldiers was published, and he came to one of our meetings and talked about that, and he really came into his own, didn't he, with that last book? It was something interestingly suppressed naturally, I can understand that perfectly. The experience of war and the experience of being so much time behind enemy lines as a forward observer, that you don't live that. You kind of say, well, that's past. But then when he wrote that book, it changed, and it did change his life at the end, and it was just an absolute joy to know Joe, and it was a total joy to know all five of them. And
Let me just interrupt you.
I'm sorry.
Because the two of you were sailors.
Yeah.
You and Joe Garland.
Yeah.
And that you developed a friendship through the sailing. Is
Yes,
that correct?
absolutely.
Over at Eastern Point? Can
Yeah.
you tell us a little about that?
I never sailed on the on that boat that he was working on, but he did where he lived. He would salute other boats that came that were interesting to him. That as they sailed by Black Rock, once in a while he'd fire off a cannon that he had there for the purpose. And one time I got a salute, so that was a great honor.
And you worked together on the adventure?
Oh yeah, thank you. The Jim Sharp, who owned the adventure, and it was a day sailor in Maine. He was turned down by the Coast Guard because it was so rotten that it had to be rebuilt to meet the standards of the Coast Guard. So they gave it to he brilliantly gave it to the city of Gloucester for $1. Now it was Gloucester's problem, and Joe was the head of the effort to rebuild it, which was successful, of course, and there she is today. And I served on board the board of the adventure for I think it was 6 years, and I did some work on her too, as doing carpentry work on it. So that was a big part of Joe's effort to sort of bring cohesion to the city and the fishing, the heritage, those two things.
And you touched on this a little, but you gave me a sort of a description of how you thought he worked, how he would get curious about something.
Oh yes, and in his writing, you can see it. I mean, talk about progressive verse. there's progression in Joe's novels that his histories. He would get curious about a certain event that happened, a battle or whatever, and he would research it as a newspaper man, and it would continue and grow and continue and grow, and he would develop it, and that's what his marvelous expository writing. That's how it resulted. That was his method of working.
Jay, we made it.
Okay, can I sum up one question?
Absolutely.
One
but
thing.
I just wanted to congratulate you.
Thank you, Peter.
On us getting through.
Well,
That's brilliant.
we worked together.
We did.
And I just want to tell you, it's been a delight working with you.
It was
Okay, so what I do want to say is this: that if any of the five came back to Gloucester today, if they could see it today, they would be dismayed and they would be appalled at the traffic, at the problems of the infrastructure, at the flourishing of condominiums, at the craziness of the council that decides whether developers are keeping in touch with the building codes or the wetlands restrictions, because they're running all over the place. And they would really, really be upset and distressed, as I am. And I hope that in their writings, what they got from Gloucester and what they gave to Gloucester does not go in, it does not die. It's got to keep going. We've got to keep going with what they did.
Jay, can I just say one
Yeah,
thing
yeah.
in answer to Martin's question? Not so much from the political side, but the thing about Gloucester that was true then and is true now, and you are an example of it, is how many people in Gloucester love Gloucester. And we wouldn't have an event like this
Yeah.
if it weren't true.
That's right.
And thank you so much
Good
for
point.
showing us some of
Okay.
its heart.